So welcome again to Zoom Etiquette. Today we're going to talk about some helpful tips and tricks and some overall just good best practices for using Zoom for meetings, for class, for everything that we're using Zoom for these days. So to just start off, good afternoon, everyone. I hope everybody got outside today. It was a beautiful day. And I am Joe Bavzano, the director of the ADP Center for Learning Technologies. I'm very excited you guys are all here with us today. So to just jump in, the first section we're going to talk about today is some do's and don'ts on Zoom. We want to treat the Zoom call as if it were taking place in a conference room. I think it's something that we all, it's somewhere we all wish we were. So we want to kind of treat these calls like as if we were sitting together around a conference table, just like the good old days before COVID. So we want to make sure, just as if we were walking into a regular meeting, we want to be prompt, we want to be courteous. Video meetings make it very obvious when someone is late. So if it's an important call, we want to make sure you're here on time. Just as if, you were walking in a room. The Zoom waiting rooms make it even more obvious when someone is late. It's a security feature that I do recommend stays on. So we want to make sure that we're in on time and, ready to go when the meeting starts. Best practice is to log in a few minutes early. And what tends to happen about being timely, we want to make sure the host doesn't have to keep stopping and going back and forth. So waiting rooms are a good thing. We should leave them on, but best practice. Also today, just to kind of point out for you guys the chat, I do have one of our wonderful student workers from the ADP Center, Jihan, monitoring our chat. So if you guys have any questions and aren't comfortable interrupting me, please feel free to interrupt. But you could type them in the chat and Jihan will interrupt at the appropriate time. So best practice is to get on a call a few minutes early to ensure you don't have any connection issues and that we can make the meeting, and we don't want to miss any kind of key introductions into the beginning of a presentation or a meeting. We want to make sure that we're there for the whole time. Just a little pro tip from us is make sure set your calendar appointments to give you a reminder 10 minutes before. At Montclair State, we use Google Calendar for most of our scheduling. So you can add a nice little 10-minute reminder before a session. Just to give you a heads up, I get emails from my phone, from my computer. I get pinged every which way 10 minutes before a call. So it usually is a good heads up for me to kind of get ready, sit down, collect myself, and get ready for a meeting. Something else is don't be camera shy. We want to make every effort to feel like this is an in-person meeting, as I said. If there's a reason you can't have your camera on, it's completely understandable, but we do want to try to make sure that you have a headshot and not some kind of funny avatar. You could see in the little GIF on the bottom of the screen, somebody has a unicorn. But we want to make sure that we know who it is. What are some good identifiers? I'm going to just, as an example real quick, if I shut my video off, it's a headshot of me at work. So we know very easily who's talking when the picture pops up if you're an active speaker view. So we want to make sure that we can kind of still form a connection to the audience, because that is key. If I'm here presenting and I'm looking at a bunch of squares with nothing in it, it is a little harder for me to identify with my audience, because I want to make sure that the audience can understand where we're at. I want to make sure that there's some good feedback, and if somebody looks confused, I want to be able to quick stop and help them. So like I said, the host of the meeting should feel connected to the participants. If you're not comfortable, because of where you're sitting, we recommend using a virtual background. Montclair State has a bunch of great professionally branded backgrounds like the one behind me today. So just a way around it. Something else to kind of talk about is this thing on. We want you to interrupt on a Zoom meeting, just as if you were in a conference room sitting around the table. We want to make sure that there is this natural fluid conversation throughout. So get good at watching for signals that someone is going to be done talking. You don't necessarily have to ask permission, but you can use somebody's body language to kind of to your advantage to see if it's a good time to interject. You could also use the raise hand feature, which is a great little kind of subtle way to say, hey, especially when you're screen sharing, it is a little difficult to see everyone on the call all at once. If you're sharing your screen like I am now, I can only see a handful of people in the meeting, not everyone. But it is important to still be heard. This is still a meeting. We still want to hear, everybody's opinions. We want to get some valuable feedback from the other participants. So you should be heard. And we want to try to stay engaged throughout the meeting. Chime in when appropriate. And this is something that I know it sounds a little difficult to do, but try to maintain eye contact with your meeting participants as much as possible. If I'm talking, even though I'm looking at a screen, I still want to make sure my shoulders are squared up. I'm looking head on into the camera, so I can still have a connection with my audience. And you could always also just take yourself off mute, and that's a good signal to, if this really applies if you're not screen sharing, but when you take yourself off mute, people in the meeting do tend to take notice. So that is a good cue to say, hey, I'm about to say something. A pro tip for this is test your audio before the call so there's no hiccups. Get comfortable with using the Zoom interface just ahead of time. So when you go to, log into your next meeting, you're super comfortable. You can take a deep breath and you can really have a very high quality meeting. So the chat. In a Zoom call, there is the chat feature. Yes, the messages are private if you are sending them directly to another person, and no, the host cannot see those messages after the call. But all chat logs just typed directly into the box. Those are public, and those will be saved along with the recording of the call. And anybody that has the save chat feature enabled, the call logs, the chat will be saved with the call logs. So something to keep in mind with what you're putting in the chat. It can really be a great productivity feature, but if you're in a big meeting, it can get confusing fast. And if anybody's ever been in a meeting like that, it gets away from you quick. So it could be a great tool, but we want to use it sparingly and we want to use it directly. And just as a side note, it can be a great non-meeting feature. If you're using the Zoom desktop client, like my team, the EDP Center does, we use it as an instant messaging platform and it's perfect. My whole team, we all use it. We use it from our phones. So when somebody's away from the desk, it goes right to their phone and we're in kind of constant contact, during our shifts when appropriate. And a little tip about the chat feature is you can drop pretty much any type of file in the chat. Works really well with images and PDFs. Images are displayed like immediately as soon as you drop it in there. GIFs work. And you can kind of see my Bitmoji on the corner. Our team uses a lot of Bitmojis. It's just a fun way to kind of keep each other connected and kind of still see a little bit of each other's personality, even if it's in, a very two-dimensional chat. So this is an important slide. So when we're in a Zoom meeting, we want to kind of find the balance between professionalism and comfort. Yes, we are working from home. A lot of us are remote. We want to make sure, we're not taking advantage of this situation. We don't want to get too comfortable because we're home for a reason, right? Most of us probably wouldn't be remote, including myself. I would certainly not be remote if it was safe to return to work all the time. So just kind of finding that happy medium between working from home, sitting still, finding a calm place, and just figuring out what I should and shouldn't be doing in this meeting on Zoom. So sitting still. This is crucial, and it's not even so much you sitting still, it's we want to make sure the device is still. We don't want to be walking around with your laptop. We don't want to be moving too much. We don't want to take everybody on a wild ride because I promise you it will make everyone dizzy. If somebody's really watching your your little box closely, it will get rather confusing. So we want you to find a good spot where you're situated, where you can sit up straight, where I can be comfortable for a decent amount of time. And depending on this guy in the picture, he looks like he's in shorts. So we want to make sure that we're not giving away too much if you're in sweatpants during your call. That happens sometimes. So we also want to find a calm space. We want to put our phones on silent, put it away for a second. We want to shut the door to whatever room you're in if you can. Right now I'm sitting in my dining room. There's no room, but I did make sure that everything around, nothing was going to go off, no timer was going to ring, nothing like that. So I did make sure I was in a calm environment because the focus should be on the meeting. It shouldn't be on any distractions. I do recommend if you have an email client on your computer, I use Apple Mail and that pings every few minutes every time I get an email. So before the meeting, I quit the application just to make sure I'm not distracted and there's not too many things happening that are going to take my focus off, my call, my class, my whatever. And something else that I think is a little bit up for debate is the no eating. I was looking and doing some research for this presentation. I was trying to see like what was the general consensus for Zoom etiquette based on what my experience was, what my team's experience was, and kind of what was out there. And the no eating thing was interesting because I never really thought about it. I don't think I've ever eaten during a Zoom call, but I have eaten during a meeting at work because sometimes time is tight. So I think general rule of thumb is if you could avoid it, avoid it. But certainly if you have to eat, you have to eat. Nobody wants to be hungry during a meeting. I get hangry. Nobody wants to deal with that. So just rule of thumb, if you are going to eat, stay away from crunchy foods, stay away from chips. And if you're going to eat, keep yourself on mute, especially if you're using a headset where you're going to hear everything very clearly. And I don't want to hear somebody chewing during our meeting. So best practice, keep yourself on mute or just wait until after the meeting. Multitasking. This is something I think many of us are probably guilty of during a Zoom meeting. I think it's also something we might be guilty of during a regular meeting as well, but I think it's a little bit more obvious during a Zoom meeting. We want to make sure that we are discussing the topic at hand. And chances are, if I'm looking at something in the corner of my screen, it's going to be rather obvious that I'm not paying attention to what's happening directly in front of me. Even though you might be a little square in the meeting, it is still rather, it's noticeable that your attention is all of a sudden shifted somewhere else. So we want to make sure that we're looking straight at the meeting the whole time, and we're that's what's on our screen. If you look away to check an email now and then, who can blame you? But if you do screen share, this is always where it comes in. It could make multitasking very obvious. And I'm sure most of us in the last year have been on a call with somebody where they screen share something and Facebook is open or Amazon is up. So we want to be very conscious of what we're doing if we're going to share our screen. Good rule of thumb, keep everything on your computer organized if you're going to be, on these screen sharing kind of in this world a lot. It's going to make things a lot easier for you because cleaning up things, there's less clutter. It's going to make it a lot easier to find what you're looking for. And the other thing is we don't want anything sensitive or confidential about yourself or about others. We don't want any of that to pop up. We don't want, somebody to share their screen and there to be a dead giveaway that, they're, having trouble with an employee or something like that. So we want to make sure that we're careful what we're screen sharing. A pro tip for this is use a separate browser for exactly what you're doing. So if you're sharing something like from Google Slides, like this presentation, this is the only thing I have open in this Chrome tab, in this Chrome window. So I do have my work stuff open in another one, and that's minimized and put to the side. So that's important because we don't want to share something, or see somebody's email. That's always something that can be kind of uncomfortable for all involved. So our second section, lights, camera, action. So how to improve the look and feel of your Zoom meeting. And this kind of goes back to sitting in a conference room. So quality is crucial. We always, before a meeting, we like to compose ourselves a little bit. We should be doing the same thing on a Zoom call. Take the second to walk around the dining room table like I do. Take a second to look out the window, open the door, take a breath of air, just something to kind of get yourself relaxed and in a good space, because sometimes we could be sitting in a Zoom meeting that is long. And Zoom fatigue, I am a wholehearted believer that it is very real. So staring at a screen all day, even if you're somebody that is very technical, tech savvy, it's a lot. So it's something to kind of keep in mind. Audio in a Zoom meeting. Audio is crucial. I always do like to recommend, if you have earbuds, AirPods, a headset, anything that has a mic in it, use that. It could be a little more challenging. I know I have some colleagues that advise against using like earbuds that come with your phone that have the mic on the cord, because if somebody has longer hair, it does tend to rustle, or if somebody's wearing like a high collared shirt, it could be a little distracting. But if we can avoid that, if you can, push your hair back or fix your shirt so you're not going to have the interference, I think the quality it makes a big difference. So I'm going to just show you. So this is with using my headset, and then this is just using the built-in microphone in my MacBook. So you guys should hear a difference in quality. So we want to always make sure that our audio quality is the best it can be. It's also going to make a big difference if you're using like the auto transcription feature, or if you're recording and later in Zoom transcribes and captions it. We want our audio to be, as high of quality as possible, so everything else is more accurate. Keep in mind where you're taking your call. Echoey rooms and background noise will impact the quality. It's going to be distracting. Let's face it, sometimes your internet, no matter where you are, the internet quality might not always be as good. So if your call drops a little bit, if I'm speaking clearly, if our quality is good, it's going to be a lot easier to make out what I'm saying. And Zoom does do a decent job at noise cancellation. This is a newer feature. Just little side note, I always do recommend that you check for updates in your Zoom application. If you're using a university-owned machine, I know Montclair State pushes out updates all the time. So we always want to make sure we're using the latest and greatest of the Zoom application, because they do hide little features like the noise cancellation in some of their updates, and it does make a big difference. But ultimately, we want to set up the noise cancellation to work. We want to make sure that we are still trying to be as proactive and in as quiet of an environment as we can. That's not always possible. I work a lot with our K-12 teachers that are in a classroom, and I just had this conversation with a few of them yesterday where they were recording something and they're like, oh, the heat in the classroom is awful. They have no control over that. So we did go into their Zoom settings. We turned up the noise cancellation a few notches, and it did make a big difference, and it did really improve the audio quality of their call. Something I do like to I mentioned it about headphones and AirPods. If you are using wireless headphones, please, 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 please be comfortable with using them with your computer. Make sure they're paired with your device. You don't have to necessarily unpair them if you want to switch them off. You can go into, if you see in the screenshot in the slide, you can go into the little microphone next to the microphone and the mute button. If you hit the up arrow, it will let you select what microphone and speaker you're using. So if you did want to switch back and forth, you can do that fairly easily right there, right in the call. Zoom has a lot of functionality built into the call, so you don't have to leave the call. And if you can avoid leaving the call, it makes it a lot easier for you. And we want it to be simple. We want everyone to be comfortable. So it all lives right there. Okay, so for video, we want to try to keep our video eye level if possible. If we can prop your computer up, we want to look at the camera kind of right in the eye, right? So we want to make it feel a little bit more engaging to our audience. We want to make sure the lighting is good. We want to make sure my face is nice and clear. We want to make sure there's not too many shadows. I want to look good. You guys want me to look good. We want to make sure there's a clear connection with our audience. A good tip is don't sit right in front of a window. If you're very heavily backlit, I'm sure a lot of people have taken a picture, into like a sunset with somebody standing in front of it. Often, because the background is so bright, the subject is going to be very dark. But you can use windows to your advantage. So right now, the windows in this room are in front of me, so my face is nice and evenly lit. As long as you can avoid some heavy shadows, I would say you're good to go. Again, depending on the quality of your internet that you're connected to, excuse me, sometimes it may dip in and out. So if your quality is really good, if you lose some through the internet, you're still going to have a nice quality, and the call is still going to be good. Oops, sorry, this last thing, I copy and pasted slides, my bad. But if you're looking straight at the device, it's going to help reduce eye and neck strain. You're going to be more comfortable on the call. And if you're more comfortable, everybody in the audience is going to be more comfortable. Everyone you're talking to is going to be more comfortable. And I think it's one of those things that it's like a subconscious thing where if everybody looks like they're engaged, you're going to be engaged. So one little thing just on the side, I have those two pictures. So the eye level makes a big difference. And if you're sitting back, so right now I do have like a random box that I found around the house underneath my computer. So I could sit up straight and I could see it, see eye level, but we want to make sure we're not sitting too close. We want to make sure the camera's not tilted up. I don't want to see up your nose. You don't want to see up my nose. So giving yourself that space really makes a big difference. And with backgrounds. So I said I'm sitting in my dining room right now. I did find a spot where the light is good, but it's not necessarily in front of a solid wall. My kitchen is behind me. So I did decide to use a virtual background. I thought it looked nice and professional. It's Montclair State. Um, Virtual backgrounds are a great tool. Sometimes they tend to not work well, but extremely well. You guys can see like on my fingers as I move, sometimes it cuts in and out and it's not as clear. Um, it would work better on a solid wall. Right now there's a doorway behind me. So it tends to work better if you can do it in front of a solid wall, but chances are you're using a virtual background because you're not in front of a solid wall. So it's not a huge deal, but that's just my kind of pro tip is if you can move to a location where there's not much behind you, where it's not as busy, where the lighting is very even. Again, I don't think that's going to happen often when you're using a virtual background, but lighting is key to kind of improving the quality of a background. So some quick little helpful how-tos. I just want to talk about some features and functions that are going to make your calls go smoothly. And I think if you can master these, you can kind of just be more fluid in a Zoom meeting. If you're the host, we want to make sure you're comfortable managing participants. We want to take advantage of all the control that you're given as a host. We want to use these features to help, kind of rein in the control of a meeting. If you have a lot of people, if everyone unmutes themselves and starts talking, it just seems like it would be chaos. So as the host, you can quick mute people individually. You can ask people to unmute. You can mute everyone at once. You can unmute everyone at once. I think often when we're running larger meetings, asking someone to unmute is probably just as important as muting someone. We're all guilty of it. And I'll just randomly start talking and I'll be muted. Everyone does it. I think you get excited to talk because you're in a Zoom meeting. So I think sometimes it happens. So if you're the host and you're throwing it over to somebody, feel free to just hit unmute on them. And it's a quick little nudge to say, hey, you're muted, without everyone in the call waving and doing the Zoom kind of dance to get somebody's attention. Just a little kind of trick with that is if you hold your spacebar down while you're muted, as long as it's a default setting, but sometimes it's changed. You can change it in your settings, but if you hold the spacebar down while you're muted, it will unmute you. And that's a great little quick kind of tip, especially if you'd rather be on mute. If I know I'm not speaking in a meeting, I leave myself on mute just to eliminate any potential issue. But the spacebar trick is great because it is a good way to just kind of interject quick and say, yeah, thanks, I'm here. Hi, everyone, and then kind of go back. So just a little pointer. In call security, I'm sure everyone over the last year has heard of Zoom bombing. It kind of seemed like it went away, and now all of a sudden it seems to be coming back. So as the host of the call, we want to make sure you're in control of the security of your call. The best way to deal with call security is when you're creating the meeting, make sure you're checking certain boxes, make sure you're enabling the waiting room. I think always, always, always enable a waiting room, unless it's a call with one person that you know, that you work with often, then it's not as much of an issue. But for anything like this, I was Zoom bombed during one of these sessions a few months ago. And it was a very innocent looking college kid that jumped in, and all of a sudden there was like 150 people that followed. So I work at a university. I did not think that was going to be something that happened to me, but it did. So just keep in mind, keep the waiting room enabled. And depending on your settings, when you're creating the meeting, you might not need to touch that. But something that I will just point out is in the bottom of your screen, when you're the host, there is a security tab, as you can, a security tab, as you can see in the screenshot below. So you can lock a meeting once it's in session. So if I know everyone that's in the call, I can just lock the meeting so I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to think about it. That's an extra layer of security and protection. You can disable participant screen sharing. You can disable the chat. You could also make it so they can't rename themselves. So with whatever name they joined in with, that's locked in. You can keep it so they can start their video, so they can't start their video, so they can talk, so they can't talk. So you do have a lot of control security-wise as a host of a meeting. And there is a new thing that I just would like to point out is when you're the host of the meeting now, there is something, if you guys see in red on the bottom of that screenshot, it says suspend participant activities. That I think is very interesting. That's a newer feature in Zoom. So if I click suspend participant activities, it's going to report the call to Zoom that something happened that went against their like terms and conditions. So if you were Zoom bombed, it's going to take all of the data from the call and send it to Zoom to make sure that something like that doesn't happen again. Some new little features that I thought were worth pointing out, because not everyone is aware of all this all the time. And Zoom, like I said earlier in the session, Zoom pushes out features all the time. So sometimes it is a little bit difficult to keep up. Closed captioning is something that if you've been using Google Slides, the closed captioning in Google is very nice. I think it's like 98% accurate. It's extremely accurate and does a very good job. Zoom was a little late to the game in terms of adding automatic live closed captioning to a call. You were always able to kind of have someone come in and do captioning if you were doing like a bigger meeting, or there were third-party add-ons. But for the most part, it wasn't really easy to utilize. So now the host can turn on auto transcription during a call. I believe you can't do it while you're screen sharing, but I will just double check. Yeah, so you have to turn it on before you screen share. But if anybody has any questions about that, I can show you guys at the end. And something else that's really nice is self-assigned breakout rooms. So I don't know if anyone's using breakout rooms for classes or for meetings. Letting participants choose a room is a newer feature that was pushed out in the last few months. If anyone's ever used a breakout room, sometimes it can get confusing, and it's not something. I mean, I've shown countless people how to use the breakout rooms, but it's something that if I go to do on the fly, it does tend to be a little wonky, if you will. So the letting participants choose the rooms, if you're willing to open it up and say, okay, everyone, if you're interested in this topic, go to breakout room 1. In this topic, go to breakout room 2. And it's something where they can self-assign. It makes things so much easier. And on the participant side, it's pretty seamless too. Something that I always just like to talk about, this was a quick presentation, but I want you guys to ask me any questions you have. But right now it's meeting versus webinar. So there are two separate platforms in Zoom. It's something that I think is very important. In a Zoom webinar, think of it as if you were in a giant lecture hall with a panel happening in front of the room and 500 students sitting around. That's something we would want to use a webinar for. Webinars can go up to 1,000 people, and they can be streamed, and we can reach a much larger audience. In a webinar, there are panelists. Think of panelists like hosts, but in a webinar, only panelists can content share. We can only hear their audio, their video. Those are the only people we're seeing. They're best used, like I said, think large lecture. They're good for keynotes, product announcements, educational webinars, large all hands meetings with a big staff. Participants are a listen and view kind of only role here. Where in a meeting, we know that everyone can content share. We could hear everyone. We can share video with everyone. So a meeting is traditionally a meeting. But depending on what you're using, each does have its advantages and disadvantages. A meeting by default, as long as you're using a licensed account, can go up to 300 participants more if a license is applied. So that's just something to keep in mind if you were trying to do something on a very large scale. Webinars might be the way to go, depending on your district or institution. You may or may not have access to webinars, but it's just something I like to point out because it's something that's often confused when just kind of discussing, because the terminology with Zoom, since we've all been using it kind of nonstop for a year, does tend to get a little mixed up. Something else that I just like to point out is the calendar integration that you can do with Zoom. Some of you may be using it already, some of you may not be. But when you log into your online profile, if you scroll down, there is a calendars and contacts integration tab. And that tab is great because it's going to let you sync things right up to your Google Calendar. It will work with other platforms. It'll work with Outlook. But what's really nice about that is when you create a meeting, it's going to pop right on your Google Calendar or in your Outlook calendar or whatever platform you're using. Something else that I just like to point out in the screenshot is once you sync those two, if you're just creating a calendar event in Google, once you sync these, it's going to give you the option to add video conferencing right into your calendar. So you don't even have to go and make a meeting. You can just have that calendar item just directly on your calendar, and you made a Zoom meeting, and I do it all the time, and it saves a whole step, and it's nice. So this is my last slide before I open it up for questions, but I did want to just talk about the mindful meeting checklist. Zoom support put this together, and I was reading through it, and I really liked it. I think everyone knows Zoom fatigue is real, and I mentioned it before, but I think it's really critical to understand that we don't all always want to be sitting in front of a meeting and be tied to a meeting. So ask if it's necessary before you're going to say, let's have a meeting. I don't know if anybody's heard the expression, this meeting could have been an email. Let's not carry that over into Zoom. So we want to make sure that when we're coming in to the meeting, we want to have a clear purpose. We want there to be collaboration and open discussion to help us achieve our goals. And we want to discuss, complex information. So it really was necessary to make this call a meeting. And right away, if you answered no to any of those three things, we could make it an email, or it could be an instant message using the Zoom client like we talked about before. The client is a great way to kind of instant message each other and really cross a lot of things off your list in a quick way. So just to read through these, because I did really think these were great. So check your invite list. Is everyone there for a reason? We want to make sure that we're limiting the number of people in the Zoom calls. I think if anybody's been on these Zoom calls, it's more productive when you don't have a ton of people in them. We can all get more FaceTime. We can all be able to kind of openly discuss our ideas a little bit easier. Like we talked about, I think it was the first slide. Finding your cues are hard when you're in a virtual environment. We don't always know when somebody's done talking. Sometimes there's lag. I can't imagine, in a conference room, sitting around a table, all of us kind of going to talk at once. I can kind of see what's happening around me. So it is more difficult in a Zoom call. So if you can keep the call size down, cool. We want to make sure there's an agenda. Am I coming prepared to the meeting? Do I have talking points? Do I have a checklist I'm going to go through? Do I have a slide deck? We want to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to make sure that my participants are as engaged as possible. We want to make sure the meeting's an appropriate time. This workshop didn't have an end time. It starts at 4. We usually at the ADP Center kind of like to gauge our sessions are about 30 minutes. So we can have as much time as our participants need that we can kind of engage with you guys after the presentation and answer any questions. And we want to make sure that me as the host, we want to make sure that I'm in the right mindset. Am I ready to go on the call and answer questions? Did I take 10 minutes before this call, sit down and walk around the dining room table, take a deep breath, look out the window? Yes, I did. It's a beautiful day out. So I needed to make sure that I was in the right mindset before we even started this call, because if I was short and if I was, frustrated, it wouldn't go as well. Now, during the meeting, it's always a good time, think about walking in a conference room. Did we start with some small talk? Did I introduce myself? Did we say hello? That's always good. We want to encourage participation always. Like I said with you guys, if anybody had questions, throw them in the chat, and we have been keeping an eye on the chat throughout the call. And I want to stick to the agenda. I was very careful to kind of make sure that everything I've been talking about so far was in my slides. They were based on my talking points. And I'm not going to go on a tangent about something else. Running an inclusive meeting is important. I think this is just a tip, even outside Zoom. We want to make sure that everyone in our meeting, like I said, is there for a reason, but we want to make sure everyone also has an equal voice. It's good, just kind of, I think, rule of thumb. And then after the meeting, are we going to send highlights? Are we going to send out a recording of the session to anyone that missed it? And can we gather some feedback and contributions? If anyone ever has any input, they could always shoot me an email, and we would love to we love feedback, because a lot of our presentations are based on feedback we get throughout the semester. And can my meeting be evaluated? Can we improve the meeting experience? I think this is a little bit more difficult sometimes depending on what type of meeting you're using. But we always, there's always a way to kind of improve and kind of see if my meeting was effective or not. So we do have one question. Can a webinar be changed into a meeting? No. A meeting can be changed into a webinar before they're started, but once it's started, you can't switch between the two. So hope that helped. If anybody else has any other questions, please feel free. You could shoot me an email at bavzanoj@montclair.edu, and my staff and I would be happy to reach out.